Competitive Melee has always been known for one thing, like this kind of meme, right? Fox only, no items, or no items Fox, FD only. In reality, as most people know, we play on a lot more stages than just FD. But all of these stages actually have very, very glaring flaws. And today we're just going to be talking about them. We're going to be showing some off, but this is kind of a new video format I'm kind of testing out because I've been watching a lot of different breakdowns on other video games. So I really wanted to be like, well, I know a lot about Melee, and there's a lot of really funny quirks even with all the legal stages, even though we removed, every other stage like Rainbow Cruise, Brainstar Temple. There's still a lot of flaws, unfortunately, with every single stage in Melee. So I just kind of wanted to talk about that and break it down. I'll try to keep it simple so you can understand, even if you don't know much about Melee specifically, but obviously there will be some specific things still included. Let me know if you like this format, if you want me to do it for the banned stages, for other video games, for Ultimate obviously, but also I can do this with Rivals, Project M, whatever. But before we get started, let me just quickly shout out today's sponsor, Audible. Audible is a service I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with, but in case you're not, they're the leading spoken word entertainment provider all in one place. They're obviously known for their massive selection of audiobooks, but they also have podcasts and much more available. Recently, I've started coaching, and for that, I've been trying to read up on, coaching advice, mental side of performance, and breaking habits. So I've recently been listening to two great books, The Inner Game of Tennis and Atomic Habits. I think Atomic Habits is a book that most people are familiar with, so I'm going to talk about The Inner Game of Tennis in case you aren't familiar. The Inner Game of Tennis is a book that a lot of top smashers will recommend, and almost everyone in the Melee community I know have read it or at least heard about it at some point. And I've actually read it before. I own it in paperback, but because I've recently started coaching, and this book really teaches you not only how to, achieve peak performance and perform well as a competitor, it also teaches you how to teach others the very same thing. And so I've been wanting to read it again, but I've just been struggling with finding the time. So tried out Audible, started listening to it while practicing Melee, and I've been having a great time. Plowed through the book really, really quickly. It's only 4 hours and 36 minutes, which doesn't sound that long, but trust me, this is a book that if you're interested in performing well, whether it be in Smash, sports, whatever, it's a book I really, really heavily recommend. So yeah, if you're interested in trying out Inner Game of Tennis or anything else Audible has available, go to this link right here, audible.com/LEFFEN, or text LEFFEN to 500 and you can get your first 30 days for free. That's it. Let's get back to the video. So we're starting off with perhaps the most liked stage, and this is Battlefield, right? Battlefield is generally one of the most liked stages, and it's one of the least flawed stages, but it still has some glaring flaws, unfortunately. Just to start, the very basics, it's regular ceilings, meaning you die at pretty regular percents. It has a slightly taller ceiling, which means you die upwards later than most, but not like anything crazy, especially because of the high top platform. If you get hit while standing on top platform, the slightly higher ceiling actually makes it feel like the ceiling is average rather than actually slightly higher. But overall, I would say on a first look, everything feels completely fine. And honestly, for the majority of competitive games, this stage does not really run into any big issues. Balance and metagame wise, this stage is one of the most fair ones because generally no one character is like Battlefield is my best stage in the matchup. It's generally one of the most neutral stages where both characters have good things going for them, and very often the first stage you strike to, which essentially means that it's the most neutral stage. It is the stage where both people are fine with starting on, but neither player really want to use as their own counter pick. But yeah, high top platform is one of the things that do stand out. The top platform being very high does make it slightly prone for platform camping, where you essentially run away from your opponent by jumping from platform to platform. And characters that are slower, like Peach, Puff, many of the low tiers, they kind of struggle with catching characters with great full jumps or fast double jumps, like Fox Falco, Falcon, and so on. They can jump to the top platform, kind of wait for them to try to chase them, and as soon as they get to the top, they kind of try to run around them. Now, I feel like this has been like a bit exaggerated in the past, where some people think that you could circle camp and like basically just run in a circle and the opponent would never ever catch you. In reality, well, it's a strong position and you kind of make your opponent chase you, which has drawbacks for them because many of these characters don't like to chase. But I don't actually think that timing out people is that scary for the most part, and it almost never ever happens in competitive games. Like I can maybe remember like 2 or 3 times where someone actively platform camped and tried to win the set that way, and most of the time they might have won the match, but even then they still lost the overall set. Next up we have the ledges, and this is what most people talk about, and this is the most different about Battlefield, and this is also something that actually fixed in later Battlefield versions in Brawl and on, and it is the fact that these ledges right here are very, very hard to grab onto, and characters such as Fox cannot slope up on them. If you up B right into here, this area right below the edge, you just get stuck and you die. If you get hit into the stage, like stage spiked, you cannot tech the walls a lot of the time because this part is actually treated as a ceiling, and teching a hit on a ceiling puts you in significantly more lag than teching on a wall, and that lag is often enough to where you actually cannot simply make it back. And another thing is that in melee, right, like it's very, very hard to grab the edge facing the other way. You have to actually, for most characters, they have to be facing towards the edge. That means that you can't really go under the stage and then come back and up B outwards to grab the edge. And even those that can, like Fox and Falco, if you do this, it is very easy to grab the edge and simply hang on to it or roll up from the edge, creating an easy edge guard. So for the most part, if you ever get stuck in this zone below the edge, right, you're simply dead. Actually, I'm going to draw this area right here. That's bad. If you ever get stuck in this area while recovering, you're usually dead. Whereas most stages have these slopes that prevent you from ever really going in there. Another thing to note is that because there is no slopes, you also cannot wall jump. And wall jumping is also something a lot of characters use to recover. However, I don't really think this is something problematic. I would instead say that this is more of a character of the stage, right? This is something that basically makes it so that this stage stands out from all the others. And I think that that type of variety is completely fine. There's still some more things about the ledges. Basically glitches. They're programmed a little wrong. So sometimes if you go towards the edge and you try to grab it this way, with like a Fox up B or a Peach up B, whatever the case, you can often go straight through the edge and just fall past it. And this is basically due to the collision boxes and a little like nerdy shit basically happening that didn't really work out well. And sometimes you can counteract this by basically holding back as you're trying to grab the edge, which means that your character will grab the edge despite being like usually too close for it. But in some cases you actually can't do this, and it will act a little bit inconsistently, I would say. I think these days most people understand how they work at very high levels, but when you're starting out, this is definitely something you're gonna fall for every now and then. And some characters, such as Samus and Peach, are a bit more prone to getting stuck under the lip as well due to this problem when they're hanging on the edge and trying to jump up to get back to the stage. But overall, Battlefield is definitely one of the least like bad stages. It has very few flaws. Overall, a great level that almost everyone likes. Actually, there's one more thing. You see this thing right here? You can actually wall jump right here on the inside of this. These are actually counted as walls, and Samus can, if she wants to, bomb jump and then wall jump in between here to stall for a bit. It is not infinite though, and I wouldn't really characterize this as a problem more than like, well, this is a cool, neat thing you can do, because it doesn't really have any competitive applications, I wouldn't say. Some characters can also go around this, but this is not really common to use yourself, and more of a like thing where you get hit really, really far like that this way, and then you survive by going under the stage instead. But it's, you know, less than something you do in like 1 out of 1,000 matches, so it's not really that big of a deal. Honestly, I wouldn't really consider a problem to go under the stage every now and then. In some video games and in some platform fighters like Brawl, you could actually like stall by going under the stage just to avoid your opponent, but that is not really possible in this game because the recoveries are significantly weaker. Right, So moving on, we have Yoshi's. Yoshi's Story is a stage with very, very low ceilings. What that means is that it essentially, you die very early at this, both to the sides and especially upwards, you die very early. This makes it a very strong counterpick for characters that want to kill very early. And in the opposite way, if you're a character that wants to live very long, this is often a stage you do not like to go to. Next up, as you might have seen, there was a Shy Guy that came across, and the Shy Guys here are a very annoying thing that don't affect a lot of games, but when they do, they can be extremely annoying. And unfortunately, these Shy Guys that come are completely RNG. Now, they do not carry items as they do in some games, but they do go from varying speeds. There's different amounts. Sometimes there's 1, sometimes there's 5. And when they appear as random, it's basically completely impossible to know. And another annoying thing is that they can actually appear off screen, which means that like here, you see how they're off screen. If I was to be hit outside, I would actually not be ready or know that they existed at all. So why are there problems? Well, when you hit into them, there's this hit freeze. This extends your hurt box and basically freezes you in place for a couple of frames. This can mean that your attack that should hit a recovering opponent will be frozen in place for a while and your opponent has time to get past you. This can mean that your recovery gets eaten. Characters such as Ness and others that we will check on later can really, really struggle with this. And it can just mean that projectiles that you shoot, like if you shoot a projectile, like Fox Laser, it just doesn't go past it. And obviously for Fox, this is not the biggest deal, but for some characters like Samus with Charged Shard Shot or Falco with his laser, this can actually decide matches.
Shy Guys, the forces of nature are protecting Johnny.
Guys out here.
That actually was so
and
Shy Guys out here.
unfortunately, Duck, the Samus player here, ends up losing the game and maybe even the set due to this massive momentum turn when he would have been up 2-0 and instead is 1-1. He was about to make a massive comeback here.
Specifically with neutral air, I think it is definitely a good trade for Samus to do.
And it was off stage 2, so he couldn't actually have reacted in time. Ooh, yeah, that one, that's something. That's something. Oh, there's also a big one. This is the biggest one. Here, in a very crucial Game 2 of Apex 2013, Ness, played by HBox as a Youngling counterpick, is going to kill Youngling with a back throw.
He's still alive though. He's got a knockdown back throw.
Right here.
When he's in there, he's got a knockdown back.
And very, very badly DI'd from Ramada here. However, somehow Youngling does not die. That's because Shy Guys stopped his path. Intervention from God himself. And you can see Hungerbox already back in 2013, starting to pop off.
Dead. No, not yet. Too early.
And actually drops his controller.
I called it too early.
So he can't edge
It's
guard.
not that amazing. He's still a low tier character.
And as you might imagine, actually ends up losing the match. All due to Shy Guys. And I am happy. Very rarely does this one actually decide matches though, but they are completely random and they are completely like indefensible. Like they don't provide anything of value really. You don't see any real interesting gameplay. The one thing I will say is that you can play around them in an interesting way when it comes to throws. If you throw someone and there's Shy Guys nearby, they can actually act as kind of like a bouncing board, where normally Fox would just go straight up. But if I throw him into Shy Guys, they can kind of like bounce on it and they can affect the trajectory. It's important to say, right? Like these don't affect many games. If characters such as Ness, whose recovery can get screwed over by this, are more common, I think more people would be complaining about Shy Guys. But in my opinion, they're just completely, you can't really defend them at all. They provide no real value and they're just annoying. But thankfully, they don't impact very many games at all. They don't, kill you or anything like that. Next up, there's a very slight thing. This stage is slightly sloped towards the edges. This changes how moves work this move right here slightly changes its angle depending on where you are. And this can actually change things when you're edge guarding. Some moves that normally don't hit people hanging on the edge can hit because you are sloping. It can mean that if you're trying to hit someone on the platform, this one might not hit here, but if I jump slightly higher where it's not a slope or higher up on the slope, it can hit here. And this creates some inconsistencies, but generally this inconsistency is not as big and does not affect as many things as slopes in later games such as Ultimate do. And this is due to a variety of reasons, but one of the big ones is simply that you have much more micromanagement in terms of how much you can control your character. And so you can play around the slopes that exist, and also less moves are like hard coded essentially. So what this basically boils down to is that like less moves like stop hitting in the middle of them like they sometimes do in Ultimate due to slopes. However, there is still a thing where if you shine or hit someone in a very horizontal angle at the slope, their hit stun, which you use to combo people with, completely disappears because they are technically landing again because of the slope, right? And normally you have full hit stun here, but sometimes, and only sometimes, at very specific ranges, they will get hit in a way where they have absolutely no hit stun and they can then punish you instead. As far as I know, this only really affects Fox. I can't really think of any other character where this practically happens. But again, it is not super common, so it's not a big deal. Worth noting is that also due to these slopes, this can happen. What is this? Well, this slope basically meant that when I try to jump and then shine, my shine became invisible, as it's called. This is a glitch where in very, very specific scenarios, a shine can basically not have a hitbox, which means that it cannot hit the opponent. And specifically on this very part of the stage, if you do a 1-frame timing, the shine will not hit. And you can actually make this happen on the top platform like this, and at a very, very specific timing on the side platform as well. However, these are not very common things, but they are worth keeping in mind if you are a Fox main. But they're more like, you know, neat side effects and an explanation of an extra glitch. Oh yeah, this is when someone tried to do dash JC shine. Dash JC grab, and because of the slope, this doesn't work.
Shine still from SFAT. Oh, he takes into the corner, which is really smart.
That's kind of crazy though. Now, next up, we're gonna have a little bit talk about the walls before we get to the big star of the show, of the stage, which is Randall the Cloud, which is actually not his canon name, but we'll get to that. So as you might see, these walls are actually not completely flat. There's this lip right here, and this lip is actually like a solid object, funnily enough. Like normally, if you hit this way, you will fly this way, right? Kind of understandable trajectory. But sometimes you will be hit here, and because of the lip, you can fly like this, or this. And it just creates a lot of like super small random things. Additionally, if you hit like this, sometimes you will hit the lip and you will fly straight up like this, instead of just bouncing out again. A lot of really tiny weird things can happen with this lip, and just makes stage interactions very slightly inconsistent when it comes to getting stage spiked essentially. But usually these are not a big deal. That's really it, I would say, for the most part. Outside of that, the actual stage and like the construction of the stage is pretty solid. But we have Randall the goddamn Cloud, which is an unofficial name that the Melee community came up with to name this creature. This is Randall. Meet Randall. Randall is a actual platform that goes around the stage. He goes out on a timer. He starts inside the stage, and then he comes out on 55. Then he goes in on 50, like looking at the timer. He comes out again at 45. And then he goes in again at 40. And this cycle repeats itself. So he comes out at 35, and so on. So he's actually not RNG, and you can actually, by looking at the timer, which is always on in competitive Smash, you can always know where Randall is going to be. Now, there's still problems with this, and I would say that Randall actually impacts far more games than even many of the worst stages like Pokemon Stadium and Fountain in terms of like how much this weird mechanic actually changes who the winner of the match is or who the winner of the stock is. Again, you can keep track of him, and players very frequently do, to basically know like, okay, it's 15, I can side B here and he's gonna come out and I'm gonna be saved. And he's great to survive edge guards. If the opponent's holding the edge, you can use him to get an extra jump or an extra B. And you can even use him to extend your edge guards by jumping on him and jumping out further. There's tons of small interesting things on Randall, but the reality of it is most people, when they play an average match, they're not constantly playing around Randall. This essentially means that since they are not playing around Randall, whether or not he will be there when you actually recover becomes effectively random. It's not the same thing as actually random, but very things truly are true random. They're usually random enough to where we can't like count them in or like play around them because we simply don't know. And so if I'm playing as a Peach here and I'm not always looking at the timer, right? And I hit him with a move and it happens to barely send him to the right, or sorry, send her to the right, that will mean that Randall might actually be there, right? And this can very easily swing matches, which is unfortunate, but many people just think this is part of the charm, part of the like randomness and like basically fun RNG, acceptable RNG due to how fun and like due to the fact that you can actually play around it somewhat. I'm more of the camp of I think it's a little stupid. I would honestly prefer him not to be there, but I know that Randall is so well loved at this point in the community that he's not going anywhere. Even if we change stages, he's not going to go anywhere. There are additional bugs, however. The bug is essentially that if you're standing on Randall, there's a lot of weird specific things. Obviously, he goes into the stage here, and normally you just get pushed out. You don't fall in. You don't go into the stage with him. But if you're grabbing someone and you perform a throw at a very specific time, you can actually get stuck in the middle of the stage. Oh yeah, yep. That's how you go through the stage. When you get grabbed there on the Randall. You usually fall down pretty quickly or die. But sometimes, you know, there's really weird and wonky stuff you can do with that. Most of the time, this is never really done in any type of like intentional competitive way, but it is worth keeping in mind because sometimes you will fall through the stage and you just have to be very ready if you want to survive that. Next up is how he works when he's actually going in and someone's on the edge. Sometimes when you're doing something on the edge, right as he's about to appear, he will actually screw up get up at animations or wave dashes and stuff like that. And this can actually end up killing the person on the edge if they are not very wary of exactly where Randall is at every point during the match. This can mean that, like, you know, your ledge dash, instead of becoming a smooth, great option, becomes a terrible self-destruct and ends up costing you the entire match. So it's very, very important to learn how to play around Randall once you get to a higher level of proficiency in melee. But generally, it's not, you know, the most game-breaking thing ever. It's just kind of like a thing you have to play around and know how to deal with. And I think that's pretty much it. I can't really think of anything else. You have stop sign guy, or yeah, I don't really know what that one's called. But generally, it's a pretty good stage still. It's a really fun stage. It's a small stage. Encourages a lot of interaction and, you know, close fights. Definitely has its flaws, at least in my opinion, and it's definitely not my favorite stage. Next up, we have another stage that is usually seen as one of the less glitchy, better stages, and that is Dreamland. Dreamland is a stage that is very, very big. Some moves that killed upwards will actually kill as late as 20 to 30% later. And some kill confirms, such as Fox up throw upper, either work way less or don't work at all. And this can change matchups very, very drastically. Overall, for most matchups, this is a relatively neutral stage, but the ones that usually end up picking it is characters that want to live long, such as like Peach, Puff, characters with very good recovery, as the ones I just mentioned. Also characters that really want to use how wide this stage is. This stage is very, very big, and because of the platform layout, it essentially is a even wider battlefield. So the same strategy of running around the top platform can be used here as well and run away from your opponent. And in my opinion, because the platforms are slightly different in layout, that they're like a bit closer to each other in height, but like further away from each other horizontally, actually makes this one even better at camping, because you can essentially like run further on the platforms. Whereas on Battlefield, the only thing really stopping you from being attacked at any point is the fact that, you know, you have to have a good jump. Whereas on this stage, I feel like almost every character can use the platforms to run away for a bit against any other character. Whereas on Battlefield, it's really a bit more specific character versus character matchups. But overall, a very liked stage. This is probably, if I had to pick, which I'm not going to, but if I had to, this would probably be my favorite for most matchups that are not like a floaty, because those matches, because of the high ceiling, the high blast zones, they can actually become very, very annoying, and they take a bit too long. Dreamland is easily the stage with the most timeouts on, simply because in some matchups, due to both characters living long or due to someone running away, it's just really hard to make the match end on time if your opponent is actively trying to time you out. You know, timeouts in Melee are still very, very rare compared to many other competitive fighting games, especially compared to later editions of Smash, like Brawl especially, where timeouts were very, very frequent. But it's still worth noting that runaway strategies do have an increased impact on this map. Next up, we have our good old friend Wispy. Wispy the Tree. I don't know what his exact name is. Wispy brings with him a lot of small quirks. He will blow towards where most people are on the stage. So if two people are here, he will always blow this way, here on the right. But it is kind of random which way he blows, I believe, if people are standing on different sides. So what does Wispy do? Wispy pushes you away. I don't believe he affects all types of movements equally, although someone might be able to correct me in the comments below, because I feel like when I dash, I kind of like negate the effects of Wispy. But when I walk, or like when I stand still, or when I jump, he can affect it slightly more. This might be placebo, but he actually does slightly affect things such as like jumping from the edge to the platform with Fox. Rick's put out a great video on this recently where you can delve more into this, which I'll link in the comments. Very, very specific scenarios where, and we'll go through some later, where this actually affects the spacing of both characters. When you grab someone, for example, while Wispy is blowing, both of you will be pushed. And this means that sometimes you will wait for Wispy to push you so that you can throw them off stage. Sometimes this means that he will screw you over because you can no longer throw them to the platform. Sometimes during a tech chase, this will push them away from you, which you will have to adapt to. And sometimes this can lead to a dropped combo or a dropped follow-up and misspacing a move or two. Thankfully, he does not blow for very long, and he will not push you off the stage if you stand on the very edge. It is worth noting, though, that Wispy will not blow you off the stage, but it will blow you off the platform, which is an annoying detail. And this can actually be used by some characters to land with a recovery, and they have a lot of lag, but because Wispy blows them off, they actually have the lag completely taken away. But generally, I would not say that Wispy is too impactful, but there are 100% scenarios where Wispy will impact it. Here's a great example of Wispy screwing someone over. Happened today. It's the tech. It's supposed to get the shine, but due to Wispy starting to blow that very second, the shine misses. And you can kind of see here, it's supposed to hit, but Wispy happened to blow at this very, very exact moment at a time where you couldn't even react really as well. And it made the shine miss. And instead of getting a full combo, now Falco's getting screwed over. So here's the best clip showing Wispy.
Looking mighty small, Will.
It's me versus Mango.
We're going William. Shield's looking mighty small, William. Oh! Wispy wide. Wispy no.
Oh my god. Basically in the middle of this shield break.
William. Shield's looking mighty mighty
Wispy started blowing.
small William.
And it didn't actually affect Mango here. And they gave me time to mash out.
Wispy, why?
Oh my god. But overall, Wispy is definitely not what most people complain about when you see Dreamland. Simply because he kind of doesn't affect you instantly. It kind of takes a little bit, and the impact is usually manageable. Doesn't really change a whole match very often. It rather is something that both players kind of play around. Because again, right, like usually it will only impact the match when both players are on the same side. And because both players are on the same side, they're both affected by it equally. It's not very common in Melee to have one character be on one side of the stage on the ground and then have the other one just stand on the other side. In that way, maybe the stage where Wispy blowing would have affected things more, since only one player is affected by this. But for the most part, because Wispy will generally only affect things when both people are on the same spot, when both people are close together, and only blows for a very short amount, not usually a huge swing. Next up, we'll kind of talk about some of the stage layout. There is a very common thing that people mention when it comes to Dreamland, and it is called pineappling. And this is due to the bottom of the stage looking like a pineapple. This is a phenomenon where, much like Battlefield, if you get stuck under the stage of Dreamland, you will struggle to recover. And this is a bit easier for some characters to deal with than others. Fox is not usually someone that struggles a lot with it. He can usually get an angle like that. But if you do a little bit sloppy of an angle, this can hurt you. And other characters, such as Marth, this can actually affect you a lot. Where if you do the uppy slightly late, you will just get stuck there and die. Again, this is not usually something I would consider a problem, more like a feature and something you have to actively play around. That, okay, knowing this, the Marth player will try to up B a little bit further away. If they get shine maybe towards here, they have to avoid getting bonked, which is when you jump into the roof here. Or sorry, jump into the ceiling. And just try to play around, essentially. It's not actually like a flaw or like a glitch or anything. It's just, you know, the side effects of how the stage looks. However, there are a very specific detail, which I'll have to use Fox with, to show that is actually a glitch, I believe. And it is that although these side platforms here look exactly the same, they are not actually the same length. This side platform is almost impossible for Fox to jump to. It is a 1-frame timing. And when Wispy blows, you can't get up there at all. But because it is slightly longer, this is pretty easy actually if you know how to do it. And this can also affect very, very specific scenarios when you're like throwing or chasing someone on the side platform, but usually this is not a big deal. And most people don't even know that these platforms are not identical, like most other platforms. But yeah, just thought I'd mention it. And overall, for singles, this is a stage where the only real problems are with the metagame, that floaty characters live very long and that some characters can camp for very long on this stage. The actual construction of the stage is pretty good, despite it looking, you know, obviously it doesn't look great because it's a 64 game, and for some reason it has an Illuminati pyramid or something, or a boar here, and yeah, I don't really know what they were trying to do with the pixel art in the tree. And once you see it, it's kind of hard to not see it. But yeah, not actually something I would consider a problem with stage. I almost forgot to mention this. In doubles, Dreamland actually has a big flaw, especially in the American version of the game, where if someone is very high up, like right here, you can kind of see that the stock icons cover the characters. And this is a thing that they actually fixed in the European version, which came out later, where the stock icons are both lower in the UI and they are more transparent and smaller, basically. But this can actually be a very, very annoying thing that you just struggle to see where your character is because someone else on the opponent's team or your own team got hit up into the ceiling or it's recovering very high. And yeah, just Really annoying thing. Wish they would fix it, but we do actually have codes that fix this now these days. But for the most part, as far as I can tell, people just learn to play around it and basically try to keep track of their characters despite not seeing what's actually happening. All right, I think that's going to do it for now. Okay. Thank you very much for tuning in. Yeah, see you tomorrow.